Hello there, my beautiful book lovers. My name is Camille and welcome back to my channel. Today we are wrapping up 2024. It was a sort of a productive year reading wise. I finished 100 books, which I feel it's a pretty decent number. I know a few people who read so much more. They read a couple of hundreds of books, but I know like in average people do not read near 200, and they usually read like 20, 30, which honestly, if you read a book, even if it's just one, it's still pretty good, with how busy we all with our lives and everything. It is good to even finish one. So I feel like 100 is actually a pretty good sort of a number of books to read, but the number doesn't really matter. For me, I really wanted it this year to be about mostly rereading books. Simply I felt it's been a while that I haven't read some of the books that have been my favorite for years, and so that number sort of, I put it as a goal. But I also was like, now that I have said it, I have to achieve it. So I was reading till like last minute to finish up that goal. But overall, I was pretty happy about how it turned out. Since this year, I was mostly rereading my favorites. It is a little tough to do a video about all the best books that I read, because a whole bunch of them were 5 stars and I was rereading them again. So I tried for this video to not really look at the books that I have read before, and only and really focus on the books that were new and I was reading them for the first time. So anyway, let's get into it. The first book that I have, it's The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur. This is a collection of poems, and I don't know if you have read her first book. That was his Milk and Honey. That one also was one of my favorite when I read it, and I really enjoyed it. And this one, I enjoyed it honestly even more, even though the other book was also a 5-star for me. The reason that I really enjoyed it, I'm not really a poetry type of a person. It really takes sort of a specific sort and kind of a poetry to really hit it hard, to really makes a sort of an impact on me. But with this collection, I really enjoyed it because it's in different sort of chapters, and it focuses on sort of the heartbreak, the healing, the anger, and all of those different things that it's part of being humans. And I really enjoyed it. I felt that it was really beautiful, really nicely done, and it was one of those books that it's pretty quick to read, but it actually takes a while to really get into it, simply because some of them, they will really hit you, or at least for me, they really hit me to the point that I was like, I need to take a break, even though it was 4 or 5 lines of a poem, but it was I need to take a break and really think about it, or really just have a moment with it. And because of that, I really enjoyed it, and it was one of my favorites. And then another one, it was this book. It's sort of a reread, but I think this is a reread that I was I'm going to mention it again because it's such a fantastic book, honestly, that does deserve it. And that is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. If you have not read The Yellow Wallpaper, please do. It's a very short story. It's about a woman who moves to this house with her husband that has a room with a yellow wallpaper. They move into that room, and it is one of those books and one of those stories really that shows you that why we needed feminism and the feminist movement, because truly the way that this woman is treated, simply because of she just has a child, she has just a baby, and so she's really going through the depression and postpartum without really realizing, and especially because back then that was not a thing. And so it is really one of those stories that at least for me, it makes me really appreciate how far we have come, even though there are things that are just devastating at the moment. But still, to really read this story and realize that how poorly women were treated back then, And in general, even when it comes to mental health, not even women or men, in general, mental health as a main issue. So it's a beautiful story. It's very lovely and it's very short, but it's again one of those short stories that leaves such an impact that it's very well deserved to be on any 5-star list and should be read. The next book, speaking of like short stories that really leaves an impact, it's Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. I have mentioned Claire Keegan before. I actually mentioned her in my literally previous video. She's an Irish writer and she is phenomenal. And in this book, the story, it's about this coal miner, and the events are actually happening during the Christmas week. And this coal miner, now that it's like, you know, it's Christmas and it's cold and like windy, his business is sort of blooming. He's really busy. He's going all over the town to, like, you know, deliver coal to people. And then he comes across this girl. And this event is, in a sense, an event that makes him question his duty and his beliefs, and also the treatment of the society towards these behaviors. So it's a lovely book. It really is. It's one of those that brings this question that sometimes what is considered right by the society does not technically means that it's the right thing to do. And also sometimes, even though we might be judged, we might be looked at differently, that does not need or should not stop us from doing the right thing, that we know that it's the right thing to help others. And so it's, again, it's a very short story, but it's very beautiful and I enjoyed it very much. Her work, it's all phenomenal. And I feel like, especially because we're still in, I mean, we're past Christmas. My tree is not coming down till, like, I don't know, end of winter maybe. But we're still in a cold season. And so it is a very appropriate read for this season. I'm really glad that I read it. Then we have a very devastating book. Honestly, this one is one of those that, I kid you not, I cried so much during this entire book. And it's one of those books because, like, you know, like, I have read sad books, but like with a lot of them, you don't cry the entire time. Like, there are moments that it's very sad and events are happening, but generally speaking, the book, it's moving in different direction that distract you enough to, like, sort of like compose yourself and then move on. But with this book, I was crying literally like every other page, and it was just so heartbreaking. And the book, it's Human Act by Han Kang. This book, which is based on a real story of this young boy who was murdered and killed during the protests that happened in South Korea in 1980s, if I'm not wrong. And the story, it's really about different people that were sort of related or were around him during the time that he died, and during, again, that protest and everything related to that. And it is such a heart-wrenching book. I loved it because it made me realize that power, it's such a, it's corruption. It's purely corruption. And no matter where, when, in which time period, there's always this people that they are in, like, with power, especially when they are in government, and the force that they use to murder and massacre their own people simply because they want to stay in power for a little bit longer, to just, you know, abuse that power. And this book was so heartbreaking, and I have to say that, like, you have to look into it a little bit before start reading it, just in case that there's any parts or moments of it that might be too much. For me, there was a portion, a chapter, that we're following this girl that was really sort of involved in this protest, and she was arrested by the police force, and she's talking and describing the events, the things that happened to her. And honestly, it was so disturbing, at least for me, that I was listening to the audiobook and I just took out my headphones, and I was like, I'm not going to put them back on for like a couple of minutes to make sure that it's past that point, because I couldn't take it. And then after that I was like, okay, like I can continue, especially because like with this book it sort of hit hard and very close to me personally because of the event that recently was happening in Iran, related to the women freedom movement. And so it was just, it's a really heavy book, but it's written so beautifully. And I loved it because the author actually, when she was taking sort of permission from the family of this boy, the oldest brother really was like, do not tell this story unless you're going to do it justice. And I feel that she did such a great job at describing this entire story without really taking anything away from it, if anything adding so much more to it. So if you are interested into any sort of a, I cannot say it's historical fiction because it's not fiction, it's based on like real people, so it's sort of like a historical book, but it's written in like a fictional way, I guess. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend this book. It's fantastic, and it's just it was great. The next book, it's on a little bit of a lighter note. It was Funny Story by Emily Henry. She is fantastic. Honestly, I love and adore this woman so much because she does romance so well. I mean, dear God, any books of hers has been my favorite so far, but Funny Story actually was, it is still not book lovers because I feel like that one, it's always like, it's so special to me. That one was the first book that I read by Emily Henry, and I sort of feel like because of that it has this special place in my heart. But Funny Story was the second closest things. I think Funny Story and Beach Read, they are like tie on the second spot. And the Funny Story, it's about Miles and Daphne, and it is a fantastic story. So Daphne is engaged to, what was the name of the dude? Daphne's engaged to a person, and this person has a female best friend, and that girl is also dating. I don't think she's engaged. She's dating Miles, and things happened. The engagement, it's broken off. The relationship is done, and now Daphne and Miles are roommates, or like housemate, and this sort of stuff from there. And I adore these characters so much. I read this book at the beginning-ish of the 2024 because like I actually like pre-ordered it, so like by the time that it was out I got it, and I was really excited and looking forward to it because I feel like romance, it's such a great genre to read during the cold season just because it brings you all of those warm feelings. And this one was a fantastic book. The characters were lovely. The story was really engaging, and I enjoyed like the events that was happening. Nothing was similar to every other books of Emily Henry, that like, you know, everything feels so real and so there. And so I enjoyed it. It was fantastic. And if you have not read any of Emily Henry's books, please give them a try. If you have read them, I'm hoping that you have read Funny Story too. And I'm wondering if you liked it like better than any of the rest. If you didn't like it as much, let me know about that. And then I have A Woman of Myth by Jenny Williamson and Gen McMenemy, sorry. This book, it was a delight. This book, it's really about all of these different women of myth. And the lovely part was that it is not really only focused on like Western myth, but it's like include like Eastern, African. So it's like such a nice little book of all of these characters that were such a badass in different myth around the world. And I enjoyed it very much because there were some that I didn't know about. There were some that actually like came from like my culture, were related, that I knew about or I've heard about, and so it was really lovely to learn about them more. And of course there were like some of the like the, you know, more well-known women in myth of like Greek mythology that, you know, it was nice to sort of like go back to their stories and some that were new. So it was, I really enjoyed it. It was one of those books that because I love mythology, it gives you a different sense of understanding of myth and like the characters and the people that are coming from that. And so I enjoyed it. It was really nice to learn a little bit about myth from around the world, to get a better understanding and finding those similarities again and the differences. So if you are interested in any of those sort of topics, I feel like this would be a great read for that. And then it was Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. She is another author that it's one of my favorites. She is fantastic, and her books are just so empowering in different ways. And for this one, it's really focusing on our emotions. What is these emotions that makes us human being? Because like, you know, like not every living and being has all of these emotions. You know, we don't see all of them like on animals or anything, and so they are unique to us and they are what makes us human. And so this book, it's a like Atlas of the Heart, and it's going through all of these different emotions and how to deal with them, how to improve from like the consequences of some of these emotions, the anger or whatever that it is, that like there are like negative sort of emotions, but there's also like how to not look at them as negatively sometimes, because they are sources that are needed for us to sometimes push us forward. So anyway, it's a fantastic book. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot about how to not, again, like that, the most important part of it was how to not always look negatively at some of these emotions that we experience, and understand that we need them to be able to process the events that are happening to us. So if you're interested to learn a little bit more about those, I feel this is like a fantastic book for that. And then we have The Body is Not an Apology, The Power of Radical Self-Love by Sonia Renee Taylor. This book, it's another fantastic, these were all like 5 stars, of course. This is a sort of a like an essay of a book, and it is about how we're all different, right? But because of different reasons, we have been sort of taught to look at our differences, and instead of loving it, instead of hating them, or like really just not loving them, not enjoying them. And we're always like looking in the mirror and we're conscious and insecure about like, I don't know, the way that like your nose look, your weight, your body, the body hair, like your facial hair, your body hair in general. And so this book, it's really about how we have to stop that. We need to stop it, and we really need to appreciate ourselves so much more. The fact that we have this body, that it's carrying us around every single day and it's keeping up with us, such a gift that we need to really realize and appreciate it. And so I really enjoyed it. It was sort of a quick read. It wasn't that long, but it was one of those books that it's necessary to read here and there, because even as a person that I genuinely am trying to not criticize myself too much and just be like, it is what it is, and I should be happy with it. We cannot avoid that sometimes, you know, especially with like social media, there's like those moments that you're like, I wish I had that. And it could be anything, honestly, not even always about the way you look, but it could be like, I wish I was as smart, or I was as successful. And so there are those moments that comes, and because of that, I feel like it's necessary to read books like this that reminds you that like, if we were all the same, doing the same thing, being at the same level, the world would be so boring. Like, you know, it is our differences that actually makes the life worth living. And so if you have those moments sometimes, I highly recommend this book, and I hope it does for you what it did for me, to sort of remind you of you're special the way you are, because of the way that this world works, and it should be. You know, you don't need to feel insecure about those differences or those uniqueness that belongs to you. It makes you unique to be you. And so if you're interested, give it a read. Then we have actually 3 books that they were 4 stars, so I sort of felt like I will include it in this list as honorable mention. And first was Sula by Toni Morrison. So I really wanted to read books by Toni Morrison for a while now, but because of like different reasons, I don't know, I never really got into it. And like this year, technically last year, I was like, I have to do it, and I started with Sula. And this book, it's about Sula and her best friend Nell. There are these 2 young Black girls that we are following them from like very young age that they become friends to later on, by the time like, you know, they get married, kids, like, you know, life. And I enjoyed it very much so. The reason that I didn't give it a 5 stars, I think there were like moments of the book that I didn't love it. I just liked it, you know, and because of that I was like, okay, if I give it 5, then it will be a little bit like unfair. I think this was a very good 4.5. It just like needed a little bit for me to become a 5 star. But overall, I really enjoyed the theme that it was following, because like Sula and Nell, even though they're very close best friends, they are so different, and the path that they take in their lives also, it's very different. And you see that how sort of like going back to actually the previous book, that how our differences make us who we are. And you see that like how the community treats these 2 girls simply because of the decision that they made, and where it takes them, and how like sometimes they're right or wrong, it's not what it seems like, or it's not going to give you the sort of the reward or like the punishment, the thing that you expect of it. And instead you end up being more enchained because of doing the good, or being more free because of doing the bad. And so I really enjoyed that, and that was a reason that I felt that it was a very a solid 4, a very, very solid 4.5. It's so close to a 5, and so I wanted to mention it. And then the next book was Northwoods by Danielle Mason. So this book, actually, I was in this bookstore and I was looking and I was lost and I didn't know which book to get because there's too many. And I usually love and prefer to buy books that I do not know too much about, because I much rather to just get into it and then figure out the world on my own. And then this very, very lovely sales associate that saw me, and she was like, do you need help? And I was like, sure. And so she recommended this book actually to me. She was like, it's the best book that I read in the past couple of years, and I feel like you will like it. And she gave me a little bit of a summary, because I told her, I was like, please do not tell me very in depth that what is it about. And so she gave me a little bit of a summary, and it was like, sold. And so this book, it's actually about this little plot of land, and specifically this house that it's built on it, in actually Western Massachusetts, which, well, I mean, I don't live in Western Massachusetts, but I'm in Massachusetts, so I was like, fun. The town that it's there, it's fictional, but it is, the description are real enough that you feel that it's like an actual city and a town there. And we are following this house and this little plot of land throughout generations, and people move in and out of this house, different families, different circumstances, different sort of plans for this land. And it was a fantastic book. I enjoyed it very much. I was so engrossed with this story, and I loved it because I don't know, maybe it's the architect in me, but I love that this house was the main character as a part. And so for me, it was just so lovely to learn about this house and its occupants. It is one of those books that it is fiction, but it also has a little bit of elements of supernatural, especially towards the end-ish. Well, not towards the end, actually. There were moments in the middle of the books as well. So it has some supernatural elements to it as well, but I feel like it was elements that was needed. It was really nice. I didn't like felt that like, oh, all of a sudden we're jumping from this like very fictional but realistic story to like a very supernatural one. It sort of felt it's following the flow of the main story, so I enjoyed that. But it was one of those books that it was lovely, especially because like a great part of this books happened during the winter, or a lot of like the moments are in during winter, and so because I read it during the winter and cold season, it felt even more sort of like a perfect read for that. And so if you're interested in following different generations in a house, I highly recommend reading this book because it's very fun. It's lovely. And then last but not least, it's Palaces for the People by Eric Klinenberg. So this is another book that I feel like I enjoyed it so much because of like the architect and architectural aspect of it. So this book, it's really Palaces for the People. It's really focusing about architecture and how, not architecture per se, but how buildings and communities and sort of structures or whatever can bring communities together during hardship and hard times, and how much we need that, and we are sort of losing that because like, you know, throughout the history, especially before the Industrial Revolution, that like most people were living in a small little cities and towns and little villages. They had this sense of community, that they would come together for a meal, to like protect each other, to go for a hunt or whatnot. And so they had that sort of support. And as the Industrial Revolution happened and like move on, we start to lose that little by little, to the point that we have reached to a timeline that now sometimes people do not even know their neighbors and people that they have been living in this like house for like years. And he's really looking into how much that is affecting us when it comes to not as just like a society, but even as individual, that we're losing that support, and it's making us to be so much lonelier. So I found this book very fascinating. I really loved the first part because it was focusing on libraries and the joy that these places can bring to the communities, and how much they help and how much they can support almost every single person in a community, from little kids because of the program that have, to the eldest because of the program that they have for that group. And I enjoyed it so much. I went to my local library because I have my library card, but I got them online, and I usually use it for Libby just to like listen to audiobooks. But then after reading that, I was like, you know what, I am going to support the library even more. So I went to the local library that was like, it's like 5 minutes from my house really, and I got my card. I borrowed a couple of books, and then I sat there a little bit, I read, I chatted with a lovely woman that worked there, and I was just like, this is fantastic, you know, I should use it more. And so even if it's just for that, I highly recommend to give this book a go, to sort of see how you can help like those, to build, to create those sense of community for the people around you, for your neighbor, or what you can support. So anyway, again, it was a pretty decent year. I read and finished the 100 books that I had as a goal for myself. So I enjoyed that. I was pretty happy about that. I enjoyed rereading a lot of my favorites, but for this coming year, I have actually decided to not give myself such a huge number, especially because like in my personal life, I have to focus on some other things, and I know that I'm not going to be able to read as much. So I've decided to actually set for like 30 books, because I feel like that's manageable. And I'm actually really hoping to read a lot of heavy and thick books, because I have a whole bunch of them that I have been waiting to get to, but it has always been like one reason or another that I sort of didn't. In this year, because I'm going to read less, I decided that like now that I'm going to probably read like 2, maybe 3 books a month, I can like sort of like really focus on getting into these bigger books. And so I'm very excited for that. I'm really looking forward to it. I already have a whole bunch on my TBR. I'm going to continue listening to my audiobooks because that's such a fun way to get through the day, because sometimes when I'm doing all of these mundane chores and things, I much rather to listen to a book in the background instead of like, you know, have nothing going on. But as for physical books, I'm going to like focus on getting a lot of especially the books that I own. I will go back to the library for sure, and I will borrow some books, but my main focus will be to getting to all of these like bigger books that I have lying around everywhere. And by that being said, that was it for today. I hope that you also had a great reading year. I hope you had more 5 stars than even I did. I hope that you were able to reach the goal, but again, the number doesn't really matter, honestly. It's more about the experience, the books that you read and enjoyed, and finding nice and new favorites. And so till the next video, happy reading.